Speak to Edward Lucas, Senior Advisor at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Edward Lucas, thanks so much for being with us. I mean, just on the point of the changing of the rules, allowing those weapons to be used to strike deep into Russia, is there any way that the West can provide that kind of capability to Ukraine without it being an escalation in the war?
Well, first of all, I think that we need to be careful about talking about escalation as if it's the West doing or the Ukrainians doing the escalating. This is Russia doing the escalating. It's they who started the war in the first place. They started the attacks on civilian infrastructure, on power stations and schools and hospitals and all the other things that have been hit. And those 200 Iranian missiles, every one of those has a death sentence for tens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Ukrainians written on it. Ukraine is already striking deep into Russia. I think they've now 3 times hit the Olenia air base, which is in the far north of Russia, up by Norway. So they're building their own missiles, jet-powered drones and other things that can strike Russia. So this is not a complete game changer. The problem is that they don't manufacture these in large enough quantities. I think it's high time we did this. We've always dithered about helping Ukraine, whether it was air defences or tanks or the F-16 warplanes. It always comes late, and the price for delay is paid by Ukrainians in lives and lost limbs and misery and destruction. So I really hope that our leaders are going to seize the moment and give Ukraine these and the other weapons that they need to win.
Without restrictions as well, Edward. I mean, as you'll know, we've heard these threats from Putin. Should they be ignored and we should just continue on trying to give Ukraine exactly whatever it needs?
Absolutely, because there's 2 wars going on here. There's the war on the ground in Ukraine and the bit of Russia they've liberated, and there's a war of nerves which is happening in Paris and Berlin and London and Washington DC. And the war of nerves is the one that Russia's winning, because they've spooked us into thinking that we can't help Ukraine. And that's actually terribly dangerous, because what that is really showing is that nuclear blackmail works, that we are scared of Russia because Russia's got nuclear weapons. And if they succeed in that, and succeed in scaring us, and they're then able to beat Ukraine into a standstill, that makes the world a far more dangerous place. Then it's every man for himself. It's a complete nuclear dog-eat-dog world, and that would be far more dangerous than any kind of saber-rattling that Putin's doing.
Edward, let me push on that line of thinking then, because the world is a dangerous place, and obviously the balance of power with nuclear weapons is what's kept the world from falling into nuclear war previously. But we're in a different sphere now, aren't we, Edward? So by escalating, aren't we inviting that potential risk of it turning nuclear?
Well, first of all, we're not the ones escalating. We're responding to Russia, which is escalating. If we don't respond, we're showing Russia and showing the world that we are scared, and that fundamentally that nuclear blackmail works. Remember, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 in return for a promise from us and the French and the Americans and the Russians that they would not be subject to coercion and that their borders would be respected. That promise has been broken by Russia in invading, and it's broken by us if we don't help Ukraine. And the lesson the rest of the world will take away from that is that nuclear weapons work and Western promises don't. And that is the most dangerous message we could send to our enemies, and actually also to our allies, because if this goes wrong, you'll get South Korea, Japan, countries in Europe, countries all over the world saying, we can't trust the Americans anymore, we can't trust NATO, we can't trust any Western promises, and therefore we need our own nuclear weapons. So if you think it's dangerous now, it'll be a whole lot more dangerous if Ukraine doesn't win and Russia does.
So what is the next step? You said you want there to be the restrictions taken off of the targets that can be struck within Russia. Does it go further than that, or does this have to be sort of incremental, Edward, to make sure that it doesn't spiral too far too quickly?
Well, I would like to see game-changing responses from the West, not only in giving Ukraine the ATACMS, the Storm Shadow, the Taurus and the JASM missiles, which they can hit the airfields and the bases from which Russia is launching these devastating, murderous strikes on civilian infrastructure. They can also hit the logistics bases, which are essential to the Kremlin war machine, and that's what the Ukrainians want to do. But I also think we need to respond in other ways. Russia's sending drones to close down Western airfields, like Stockholm, for example, has just been crippled by mysterious drones. We've seen a Russian missile strike on a merchant vessel in the Black Sea. We've seen people beaten up. We've seen things blown up. We've seen things burnt down here in London, a Ukrainian warehouse. And we need to respond to that in this so-called grey zone or hybrid aggression. We need to do things that make Putin think, ouch, that really hurt, I better not do that again. And what I'm working on now is trying to find a toolkit for Western countries so that when we have these sub-threshold attacks here in our countries, that we can show that we have a real deterrent. And at the moment we don't have that. We've done nothing since the start of this war in 2014, or even before that, to make the Russians think, don't mess with the West, they're bigger and richer than us, and if we hit them, they'll hit us back harder. And until we start showing we're serious, these attacks on us are going to continue, and the bloodshed in Ukraine is going to continue.
I mean, Edward, the picture you're painting is that we have to fight this and fight this properly if we're going to make sure that this doesn't continue on. I mean, what does that kind of deterrent that you're thinking of look like? And you'll accept as well, just talk to us about the sort of the nervousness that people will have thinking about, hearing the way that you're discussing the coming fight.
Well, you're right, we're nervous, and we're right to be nervous, because we've missed many opportunities starting in the early 90s to deal with this, when it would have been much safer and cheaper and easier to do it. And we face an existential struggle now with a Russian regime that wants to tear up the world security order that keeps us safe and free and moderately prosperous. We have a very bleak choice. We can either do it now, while we've still got Ukraine on our side, or we can wait until Ukraine is beaten and then try and stand up to Russia in the Baltic states or Poland or Scandinavia or wherever. It'll be much, much harder. That's the choice. We don't have a nice, easy choice. And to do that, we need, first of all, to give Ukraine the weapons it needs to win. And we also need to stand up against all this other stuff that Russia's doing. And at the moment, we are failing to do that. We're talking about all sorts of other things, about the economy and health system and housing and all these very important things. We face a national security imperative. And I fear that this government, although it talked a good game about it, is not doing it. And our allies, some of them are in a better state, like Finland, Estonia, some of the European countries, Poland, they really get it. But a lot of the world and a lot of our allies are still half asleep, and some of them are just chewing their fingernails and worried, like the United States. So people talk about Trump being a problem. Well, that is a problem if he wins, but we have a Biden problem right now with the United States, and we here in Europe have got to think very hard about how we do our security when we don't have the United States watching our back.